and he said I was too emotional to handle finances, that I'd crumble in court, that I was just a vineyard wife who didn't know what a balance sheet meant. He told his mistress I'd be easy to beat. But he forgot one thing. I wrote the prenup. And I knew exactly where the loopholes were buried. Where in the world are you listening from? Subscribe to EN True Tales. Because this story isn't about forgiveness. It's about knowing exactly when to go silent and when to strike. My name is Verity Langdon. I'm 44, and I live alone now on the vineyard I once shared with my husband. Paso Robles has a way of teaching you silence. The hills roll, the air holds onto secrets, just like I did. 16 years ago, I was a corporate attorney in San Francisco. Mergers finance the ugly kind of money. That's where I met Damon. He walked into my office with a pitch deck and left with a dinner reservation. He was magnetic, the kind of man who made you believe you were lucky just to be near him. He smiled like he owned the room, and maybe in his mind he did. I wasn't naive. I'd been in boardrooms where men twice his age tried to talk over me. But Damon, he asked questions. He listened, at least in the beginning. I was sharp, he was sharper, or so he thought. When we got engaged, he was the one who suggested a prenup, said it was for optics picture, to make investors feel safe. We were building something together after all, a vineyard, a lifestyle brand, a future that looked glossy on paper. He looked at me, brushed a curl behind my ear and said, "You're the expert. Just write it." So I did. Line by line, clause by clause, not out of mistrust, out of habit, out of knowing what men like Damon become when success starts whispering in their ear. I built in contingencies, escape valves, quiet landmines that wouldn't detonate unless someone triggered them. Clause 17B, Clause 12C, Clause 4F. He never read it, signed it over wine in the kitchen, kissed my forehead, told me I was the only thing he'd never calculate. I should have known. Men who say things like that are already doing math behind your back. Back then, I didn't think I'd ever need it. But contracts are like parachutes. You don't think about them until the fall. We moved to Paso Robles 3 years later, left behind the city, the headlines, the pressure. Or at least I thought we had. He started spending more time away. Conferences, private retreats, recording sessions I wasn't invited to. Enter Chloe St. James. She was 32, sharp tongue, blonde ambition, and a voice that made even betrayal sound like a TED Talk. She interviewed him once, then again, and again. Soon she wasn't just a journalist, she was a fixture. Damon introduced her to people as an exciting thinker, then a creative partner. Eventually, he stopped introducing her altogether. They sat across from each other on a financial podcast, talking about power and legacy, and the cost of loving the wrong people. She called me a shadow of the past. He laughed. They both thought I was too rural, too soft, too disconnected from who I used to be. But they forgot. A vineyard doesn't grow without cutting back. And I've spent the last 10 years learning exactly when to prune. I didn't go looking for it. The clip found me. A former associate texted it at 2 a.m. This aged poorly. I clicked, half asleep, half curious. And there they were, Damon and Chloe, bathed in soft studio light, all smiles and shared glances. She leaned into the mic and said, "It must be hard starting over after so many years. How did you even begin the divorce process?" He didn't hesitate. "She's not litigious. She's puffed. More artist than strategist now. I don't expect a fight." He smirked. That same smug curl of his lips I'd once mistaken for charm. "Honestly, she signed the prenup years ago. Didn't even ask questions. She's easy to work with, or around." I stared at the screen, not in shock, not in rage. Just stillness. It wasn't that he'd said those things. It was that he believed them. Believed the quiet life I'd built meant I'd forgotten who I used to be. That I'd erased the woman who wrote bulletproof clauses over black coffee and court filings. But what caught me wasn't Damon's voice. It was hers. Chloe, bright, poised, fearless. The kind of confidence that comes from thinking you're on the winning team. She laughed and said, "Must be nice tying up loose ends when you've got the assets already sorted." Damon nodded. "It's all clean. She won't touch the trust accounts. Doesn't even know they exist." He was wrong. I knew about everyone. Because I created the shell corporations he used. Because I helped him structure them. And because, unlike him, I read everything I sign. The next morning, I opened the safe in my study, pulled out a copy of the prenup, felt the weight of it in my hands. Page 17. Clause 12C. Any deliberate omission of financial assets by either party invalidates the immunity provisions afforded in Sections 3, 5, and 8. Translation. If he lied, he lost protection, and I knew exactly what he was hiding. He thought he was playing chess. But the board was mine, and the rules were written in my ink. Let him talk. Let him believe, after all. What's more dangerous than a woman you think you've already beaten? Her name was Catherine Brennan. She wasn't the kind of lawyer Damon hired. No flashy website, no photo ops. Just a name passed quietly among women who'd survived men like him. I didn't call her office, I showed up in person. Her assistant looked me up and down, linen shirt, vineyard boots, no makeup. I knew what she saw, a woman who'd already lost something. But I hadn't. Not yet. Catherine opened the door herself. No handshake. Just a look, steady, unreadable. I placed the folder on her desk. The prenup, the Shell Corporation filings, screenshots, transfers, the podcast transcript printed, highlighted, dated. She didn't ask why I was there. She just flipped open the folder and began to read. 10 minutes passed, maybe 20, neither of us spoke. Then she looked up. Her voice was low, unhurried. He thinks you won't fight. I nodded once. And you want to let him believe that? Another nod. Good. She closed the folder. We won't threaten, we won't warn, we'll wait. I didn't need to tell her what kind of man Damon was. She'd seen his type. Overconfident, over-leveraged, always assuming the woman with soil under her nails forgot how to wield a contract. Catherine slid a blank notepad across the table. What are you willing to walk away with? I shook my head. The question isn't what I want, I said. It's what I already own. And I did. The land, the LLC we used to set up, the wine label, the brand licensing he didn't know I kept under my name when he was too busy chasing funding in New York. All legally mine. Catherine smiled just barely. Then let him bring the fire. We'll bring the paper trail. On the way out, I saw a framed quote by her door. It wasn't inspirational. Just a line typed in old serif font. Some women carry war in silence until the paperwork screams. I left her office knowing exactly how this would end. Damon wanted a fight in court. But what he was walking into was an autopsy with his name already filled in. The trust was buried under 3 names I didn't recognize. A woman, a holding firm in Nevada, and a foundation that had no website, no mission statement, no board of directors. But I knew the pattern. It was the same one we used back when Damon still trusted me with the truth. I remembered the structure, the layering, the way he liked to split assets across jurisdictions, so no one, not even the IRS, could map the full picture. But I could. The email thread wasn't hard to find. His cloud account was still synced to the old desktop in the cellar. He'd forgotten that part of our backup system was manual. Old habits, his not mine. The thread was titled Trust 7C, Final Structure Sign-Off. The last email had an attachment, a scanned deed for a luxury condo in Park City, another for a brownstone in Brooklyn, a third a share certificate for 17% of a biotech startup he claimed had failed. It hadn't. He'd just rerouted the equity into another name, a name he controlled through a silent trustee. The total $4.3 million untouched by the prenup unless he disclosed it. Which he hadn't. I printed everything, clipped it together, slipped it into a black envelope with a single gold paper clip. Not labeled, not mailed, just waiting. Later that night he called, casual, warm. Hey, I might stop by next week to grab a few things, for the house in Napa. I let the silence stretch, then said softly, Which house? He hesitated, laughed. The one we stayed in for our anniversary, remember? I did, because I was the one who paid the property tax last year when he forgot. Of course, I said. It'll be waiting. He hung up without suspecting a thing. In the drawer beside the envelope, I placed a single note. Just in case anything happened, it read, "If you're reading this, the trust is real, so is the fraud." Because it wasn't just about divorce anymore, it was about perjury, concealment, and a man who thought no one would ever trace the steps he left in plain sight. The audio file wasn't meant for public release. It was raw, unedited, a pre-roll recording caught by accident before the real interview started. Someone on Chloe's team leaked it, unclear if it was sabotage or just sloppiness. But it landed in my inbox from a sender I didn't recognize. No subject, no message, just the file. Studio track 2.mp3. I listened with headphones, volume low, no expression. First came the small talk, Damon clearing his throat, Chloe asking for water, their producer joking about cutting things if legal says so. Then a shift, her voice dropped. "If she pushes back, you think you're covered." Damon laughed, quiet, sharp, too confident. "She signed off on everything years ago, didn't even blink, didn't read a word." He paused, then added almost too softly, "Even the trust stuff, she has no idea. It's airtight." I stopped the audio, rewound, played that one sentence again. "Even the trust stuff, she has no idea." That wasn't just arrogance. That was an admission. I clipped the timestamp, saved the file. No edits, no enhancements, just his voice sinking his own ship with 4 careless words. Later that night I brewed tea, left the lights low, opened my case folder, slid the USB inside. The evidence was complete now assets omissions audio, a triangle of truth closing in from all sides. Damon didn't know that in California, any recorded statement used in a professional setting, even off-air, was admissible if the speaker knew they were being recorded. And he did. He was sitting in front of a mic. What he thought was a warm-up was now a weapon, one he handed to me without even realizing. I poured my tea, folded the napkin. In the stillness, I allowed myself a single thought. He thinks he's months away from freedom, but freedom requires truth, and Damon had none left. I wrote the letter the old-fashioned way, fountain pen, heavy paper, no legal header, just my name at the bottom. I folded it once, slid it into an envelope, sealed it with wax deep red vineyard thick. The recipient, Damon's attorney, the one who bragged about handling clean divorces for men with complicated finances. I didn't call, didn't email, didn't warn. The letter said exactly what it needed to say. "Please inform your client that I am aware of the concealed trust accounts, the misrepresentation of assets, and his recorded admission regarding both. As per Clause 12C of our prenuptial agreement, he is no longer entitled to immunity or exemption. All protections are void. This letter serves as formal invocation of the breach clause. Discovery begins immediately." I signed it in ink, no threats, no emotion, just fact. Then I walked it down the road to the mailbox we'd used for wine orders, invitations, anniversary cards. Dropped it in, no hesitation. When the red flag popped up, I turned back toward the vineyard. Rows and rows of vines, silent, still holding more history than most people could handle. I didn't look back. There was nothing behind me worth seeing twice. He'd started the paperwork for the end of our marriage. I'd just rewritten the ending. I invited him to dinner. No lawyer, no pretext. Just one last shared meal at the vineyard. "We need to talk before this gets ugly." I texted. Damon replied within minutes. "Appreciate your maturity. Let's keep this civil." I almost laughed. He arrived wearing his favorite gray jacket, the one he used for friendly negotiations, the one that made him look like a man too reasonable to betray anyone. He brought a bottle of wine. Not from our vineyard, something French, expensive, predictable. "I thought we could toast the end with dignity," he said, setting the bottle on the table like a peace offering. I smiled, sat opposite him, my hands calm, my voice even. "To endings, then." We ate on the terrace, sunset bleeding into the hills. The table between us held grilled sea bass, a bowl of olives, and silence sharpened like cutlery. He spoke first. "Look, Verity, you know you're hurt, but we don't have to make this messy. Let's just stick to the agreement. Walk away clean." I tilted my head. You mean the agreement you said I never read? He blinked. What? The podcast, Damon. You said I signed it without thinking. His smile faltered. That was off the record. No, it wasn't. I walked into the house and returned with a slim black folder. I laid it gently beside his wine glass. He didn't open it at first, just stared at it like it might bite. Wow, what is this, Al? Everything you forgot, I remember. He flipped it open. His eyes scanned line after line wire transfers, shell companies, the Park City condo, the brownstone in Brooklyn. Then came the transcript, the podcast, the sentence. She has no idea. He looked up, all the blood drained from his face. You were never supposed to... No, Reed, understand. You married a corporate attorney, Damon. You just assumed she turned into a gardener. He pushed the chair back, hands up. You planned this. No, I said. You did. The day you opened that trust without telling me, you wrote this ending yourself. He didn't touch his wine after that. Just stared at the folder like it might combust. You've been watching me. No, I said evenly. I've been remembering you. He shifted in his chair, suddenly smaller, suddenly aware he wasn't sitting across from the woman he thought had been left behind in vintage dresses and tasting notes. I thought we agreed to keep the business stuff clean, he said, grasping for the high ground. This was personal, Verity. Don't twist it into something it's not. I held his gaze. You twisted it the moment you told your mistress I was too soft to see you coming. He looked down, no defense, just guilt fighting ego in his throat. So what now, he asked. You want revenge? Take the house, embarrass me. I leaned back. I don't want revenge, Damon. I want math. I want every dollar accounted for, every property titled correctly, every share you thought you could bury pulled into the light. He flinched, because this wasn't rage. This was the voice of spreadsheets, of legally binding definitions, of a woman who knew which words cost millions when said in court. You'll lose friends, he muttered. I didn't marry you for your friends. He grabbed the wine bottle, twisted the cap, poured himself half a glass with shaky hands. But he didn't drink it. He stared at it like it might reveal something else he didn't control. You really wrote the prenup for this? No, I said. I wrote it because I loved you, and I knew someday you might stop deserving that love. He stared, openly now, no mask left. You'll ruin me, he whispered. I took a long breath. You already did that to yourself. I'm just returning the favor in a language you finally understand. We sat in silence as the sun dipped behind the vineyard, the same view we once toasted, the same land he thought I'd let go. He reached for the folder again. But this time, his hands were steady, like he knew there was no version of this where he walked away clean. The pen I handed him was gold, not symbolic, just familiar. He'd used it to sign our wedding certificate, to endorse checks for properties I found, to autograph copies of his book where he credited my ever-patient wife in the acknowledgments. He hesitated. What is this exactly? Declaration, I said, stating that all assets have been fully disclosed and that you acknowledge the prenup as binding in full effect, no exemption, no renegotiation. You think I'd sign that? I shrugged. You already did once. This is just the updated version, with the dates that matter now. He flipped the last page, read the clause. You added a line, he said. No, I said. I clarified one. Clause 12C. Same foundation. But now with the language citing his recorded admission, the specific trust account numbers, and the forfeiture clause if perjury is discovered after signing. He looked up, eyes narrowed. You're bluffing. Am I? I slid a second folder across the table. Inside, a printout of the CloudSync logs, a certified timestamp from the podcast distributor, 3 emails forwarded by his own assistant confirming he instructed legal to delay disclosures until divorce finalized. He read, his jaw locked. Chloe doesn't know about this. I didn't reply. Bamp, she thinks you're clever. That's not illegal. He closed the folder, sat still for a long moment, then said, "If I sign this, you'll let it go." I looked at him. "If you sign it, you're accepting the terms of a contract you said I was too stupid to understand. You're admitting I was never the fool you were." He didn't argue. Just lifted the pen, pressed it to the page, and signed. No flourish, no drama. Just a small trembling signature beneath a document that quietly rewrote the ending he thought he'd already won. I watched him stand, pick up his jacket, leave the wine untouched. He didn't look back, because he knew he wasn't walking away from a marriage. He was walking into a reckoning. The hearing wasn't supposed to be dramatic. A clean California no-fault divorce, an agreed prenup, an uncontested split. Damon's lawyer arrived in a tailored navy suit, smiling like he'd already won. I wore gray, hair pinned back, a soft scarf knotted at my neck. The judge asked if we'd reviewed the final settlement. Damon's lawyer stood. "Yes, Your Honor, my client has disclosed all relevant assets. He's prepared to proceed in good faith." I stood second, no tremble, no edge. "Your Honor, I have reason to believe my spouse has intentionally concealed multiple trust accounts, and I have submitted supporting evidence to the court." The room shifted. Damon blinked, didn't speak. The judge lifted a folder just delivered to the bench, flipped through documents, paused on a transcript. "This is audio from a podcast." "Unedited," I said, "recorded in a studio. My husband refers directly to concealed assets." Damon's lawyer raised his hand. "We object this wasn't verified under oath." The speaker was aware of being recorded. California evidence rules allow it, especially when used to supplement a signed financial declaration. The judge leaned back, stared at Damon. "Mr. Langdon, did you or did you not disclose the existence of Trust 7C or the Park City property in your affidavit?" He hesitated, then lied. "I believe those assets were exempt." I slid another document forward. "Your Honor, this is his email to his financial advisor dated 1 week before the affidavit, specifically referencing delaying disclosure until divorce was finalized." The judge looked at him again. "Mr. Langdon, if this is confirmed, you've not only violated your financial declaration, you've opened the door for the prenuptial agreement to be voided in parts that previously protected you." His lawyer looked sick. Chloe wasn't in court, but her name was on the financial transfers. Her signature was on one of the trust disbursements. Damon closed his eyes. The judge tapped a pen on the desk. "We're moving this to evidentiary review. All asset protections are now suspended. If fraud is established, you may be subject to criminal referral." He turned to me. "Ms. Langdon, you've been silent in these proceedings until now. Do you wish to amend your claim?" I smiled, but only slightly. "Yes, Your Honor, I wish to claim full spousal interest in all concealed or misrepresented holdings, per Clause 12C of our prenup." Word spread fast. By the time we left the courtroom, the court clerk had already whispered something to a reporter waiting outside. Damon walked 2 steps ahead of his lawyer, jaw-tight phone buzzing endlessly in his pocket. Chloe posted nothing that day. Her podcast account quietly disabled comments by noon. 2 days later, a formal audit request was filed by the court-appointed forensic accountant. Trust 7C, the Park City condo, the equity shares in the biotech firm he'd written off, all under review, all frozen. The bank halted disbursements. His business partners began distancing. Investors started calling with very different tones. It wasn't just about the divorce anymore, it was about credibility, compliance, legal risk. The man who once stood on TEDx stages talking about transparent leadership was now the subject of a quiet but very real SEC inquiry. He tried to get ahead of it, issued a statement about a miscommunication during financial transition. No one bought it. His name was quietly removed from the advisory board of 2 startups by the end of the week. One called it a mutual decision. The other didn't comment at all. As for me, I didn't speak publicly. Didn't post, didn't gloat. I tended to the vineyard, checked the soil, cleaned the bottling press. Catherine sent me updates, calm, efficient, precise. "We won't need trial," she wrote. "He's not contesting the amended claim. He knows he'll lose." I received full ownership of the Paso Robles property, the wine business, and more importantly, an admission of financial misconduct attached to the court record. He signed it in a deposition room under oath. No spin, no way to erase it. Not even with his best PR team. By the time the paperwork cleared, his accounts were drained by penalties and settlement adjustments. He was left with what he'd always feared most, a quiet reputation collapse. No scandal, no headlines, just silence. People stopped calling, investors disappeared. Chloe left the podcast circuit completely. In the end, he didn't lose because I exposed him. He lost because he underestimated the one thing he thought he could control: me. Spring came slow that year, like everything needed time to breathe again. The vineyard was quiet, but not empty. People asked if I'd leave Paso Robles, start over, forget. I didn't. This land never betrayed me. He did. I renamed the label. Not Langdon Cellars anymore, just Child's Clause 12. Short, sharp, private joke in legal language. When guests asked, I just said, "It's about knowing what protects you, especially when no one's looking." I didn't talk about the court, didn't tell the story. But it lived here, in the soil, in every cork I sealed myself. Once I saw him, at a roadside market. He looked older, not ruined, just worn. He didn't see me. I didn't need him to. The truth had done its job, quietly, completely. Justice, I've learned, isn't always loud. Sometimes it tastes like good wine poured for the right people, at the right time, by a woman no one saw coming. And that's enough. I didn't win by destroying him. I won because I never had to raise my voice. And he still heard me,